Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We're very honored to welcome at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, U.S. Congressional Delegation on this week post-Easter. We have with us Ed Royce, Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and Eliot Engel, Ranking Member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome, gentlemen. We welcome you at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Very happy to have you with us. And we know that you have just come back from Dnipropetrovsk and you've been traveling in Ukraine, so very keen on hearing your first-hand impressions and thoughts. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity, and we thank the members of the media for being here. And yes, we did just return from the East. We had a delegation of 8 members of Congress, and we had an opportunity there to speak to many people, mostly Russian-speaking, about the situation in the East and their perception. And what they shared with us was that there is a tremendous amount, in their view, there's a tremendous amount of propaganda being utilized by the Russians to say things which are not true. We also talked to representatives of the minority communities there as well, in order to try to see what their impressions were. And this was what was conveyed to us, that the election on May 25th was very important because it is an opportunity for all Ukrainians to take part in establishing a new government. The groups that we talked to, including representatives from civil society, felt that we were going to see a huge turnout from that region. As we talked with Russian speakers, we did not find any that were not enthusiastic about the upcoming election. And from what we have observed in these conversations, it seems that the real interest is in having the European community, NGO groups involved in monitoring the elections, in making certain that they are free and fair, and making certain that no one tries to disrupt the upcoming election. We also had the opportunity to meet with Vice President Biden in a meeting yesterday evening to talk with him about his observations. And let me say that I think his point is well taken, the point he made today. It is about time that Russia live up to the agreement it made last week in Geneva with respect to participating in disarming those who are those militants who are intimidating people. And another observation is that it seems that Russian special forces are involved in the East in trying to foment difficulties for Ukraine. And so now would be the appropriate time under that agreement for the Russians to pull back their special forces that are operating there in a clandestine way and are trying to disrupt. With that said, let me introduce Eliot Engel. I'm Ed Royce, as I mentioned, from California, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Eliot Engel from New York is the ranking member, and he has 4 grandparents who came from Ukraine. So, Mr. Engel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first start off by saying how happy I am to be in Ukraine, how much I feel a part of the revolution that happened here, that Ukrainians on the Maidan were an inspiration to so many millions of people all around the world, and that I think not only Ukraine has a stake in these elections on May 25th, but that the whole free world has a stake in these elections. We have to make sure that these elections are held, that they're actively participated in, and that's the answer to Putin. The answer to Putin is that he's not going to crush a free and democratic Ukraine because the people of Ukraine will not stand for it. And I think that's the most important thing. We, in our delegation here in the United States Congress, is a bipartisan delegation from both political parties, and we're all united in the fact that we support Ukraine in its struggle for freedom, and we want to do everything we can to help Ukraine. We met with our Vice President yesterday, Joe Biden, who was here, and he issued a statement today saying that there will be more money and support for Ukraine, support for holding these elections, financial support on May 25th, and that the United States will continue to be engaged. So I just want to say to the Ukrainian people that the United States stands with you, the United States supports you, the United States knows how important your struggle for freedom is, because your struggle for freedom is really everybody's struggle for freedom. And I'm delighted and honored to be here. Thank you.
I think a short statement from our other members would be appropriate. Should we start with Mr. Ted Poe from Texas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ted Poe. I'm from the state of Texas. I'm impressed with the Ukrainian resolve not to be bullied by bully bear Putin, and I hope that we can, in the United States, work to help relieve some of the energy issues in Ukraine by expediting delivery and sale and development of natural gas from the United States long term, to give the Ukrainian people and other countries in this area an alternative to the monopoly of Putin's Gazprom. But thank you once again.
David Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Thank you. I'm also happy to be here as part of a bipartisan delegation to really reaffirm the strong support of the American people for the Ukrainian people as you continue to work for these democratic values. We are all fortunate and behind this podium to have been born into a country with a very well-established democracy, and to see over the last several days the courage and the tenacity of the Ukrainian people as they advance their own democracy has been inspiring. We are here to say that it is important not only for the Ukrainian people, but as Eliot said, for the entire world, that these elections be free and fair, and that the Ukrainian people have an opportunity to have their voices heard in this presidential election. And we look forward to continuing to support that effort in any way that we can, because it's important to give voice to the Ukrainian people in this struggle for their democracy.
Jim Gerlach of Pennsylvania.
Well, let me say how pleased we are to be here as a bipartisan delegation to talk firsthand with your leaders all across this country on the importance of moving forward, not only in the short term with the elections on May 25th, but beyond that, the kinds of reforms that will be absolutely necessary for Ukraine to continue to advance economically for its future. We look forward as members of Congress to continue to work with your elected officials on trying to put forward the policies, not only with the United States and Ukraine, but also with other democratic countries around the world, so Ukraine can continue to advance, can continue to grow and expand, offer opportunities to its citizens economically as well as democratically. And we will continue to undertake those efforts when we return to Washington, D.C. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we thank all the Ukraine officials we've met with and for the great hospitality we've also received here. Thank you.
Alan Lowenthal from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also, Ranking Member Engel, for bringing this delegation here to the Ukraine. I'm just going to say that I am so impressed with the energy and the enthusiasm of the Ukrainian people. I personally believe that May 25th in the long history of the Ukraine may be one of the most critical dates that they have ever gone through. This is the defining moment of whether this country moves forward in a democratic way and asserts its independence and its democracy. And I think lots of the forces out there don't want this to happen. we in the United States want to be supportive of democracy, want to make sure and to provide whatever kinds of help we can to make sure that that election is a fair election and that the people of the Ukraine speak clearly, whatever their choices are. We know that they are going to turn out in overwhelming numbers. Everyone we have met has said we will participate in this election.
And Lois Franklin from Florida.
Florida. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, not only as a member of the United States Congress, but as a mother who understands how Ukrainians want to raise their children in a country that is free, that is democratic, that has honest and transparent leaders, and to emphasize the importance of this upcoming election, that it be free and fair, so that democracy can become a reality.
Questions from members of the press?
Thank you. Hold on, just 1 second.
Hello, so Reuben Johnson from the Weekly Standard in Washington. My question, any of you feel free to answer, but just listening to what you were saying about visiting in Dnipropetrovsk, that you find no one saying, of the Russian-speaking population, saying that they feel threatened, that they feel danger from this government. But this has been the battle cry of Russian propaganda. The Russians have also told us that there are no troops anywhere in Ukraine, but we have overwhelming evidence that there are. So you can't believe anything they say. How do you deal with this government of criminals?
You know, the interesting aspect of our conversations there, one of the things we did do was meet with representatives of various minority communities, NGO groups, but the Jewish community. We met with several hundred representatives of the Jewish community there that are all looking forward to participating in the election based on the conversations that I had individually, and who shared with me, many of them shared with us, the way in which propaganda is used today from Moscow, and the history of how in Ukraine the facilities were destroyed to broadcast into the Russian-speaking population at one point, and how the news cycle now 24/7, it seems this way to them, is propaganda saying things that are demonstrably not true, misrepresenting the current government in Ukraine, misrepresenting the intentions going into this election of the people who are trying to transition Ukraine to a new representative government, feeling that they have a responsibility to communicate the truth about this. But you could also see it in civil society and in the participation there, as we spoke not just with the governor, but representatives of different groups that were all there to do what? To help people who were coming in from the east or coming in from Crimea, because the very real discrimination is occurring there today. And it's as though the truth has been turned on its head in some of these broadcasts that are coming out of Russia. So what do you do about this? Well, during the 1980s, I had an opportunity in Eastern Europe. I spent some time in East Germany to see how effective Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty was at that time in setting the record straight with real news and information. What I can say today is that the press is heavily present in Eastern Ukraine right now. And that has been of enormous consequence to public opinion worldwide, except in Russia, because in Russia there is now a monopoly control over the media. And so for Russian-speaking audiences in Russia or beyond Russia, those Russian-speaking audiences are hearing things that are just not true. We need to, frankly, revamp the Broadcasting Board of Governors in the U.S. Myself and Eliot Engel and our staff have been talking about this, in order to return Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to its original intent, which is to promote liberty and information and be a surrogate-free radio service. That will have, I think, an impact if we do that effectively in Russia, to answer your question. Other questions?
Ask you.
Hold on, can you just speak in the phone because there is
Yeah,
a
sure.
translation.
Beg your pardon. Daria Marchak, Bloomberg Agency. I beg your pardon for being so. See. Okay. So you talked about assistance to Ukraine, and it's just like very good words, and we are pleased to hear them. But could you please elaborate on that? What kind of assistance could you propose us? Because you know that recently United States provided state guarantees for Ukrainian Eurobonds. But maybe we could speak about some other kinds of assistance, for example, in energy field and so on. Thanks.
Let me answer that question by observing that first we have passed legislation co-sponsored by myself and Mr. Engel into the Senate, and then received legislation back from the Senate for support for loan guarantees from the United States. But on top of that, we've worked with the IMF in order to make certain that there is the financial support. But on top of that, there's assistance such as energy assistance, which we talked to the Vice President about last night. Mr. Poe, Ted Poe of Texas, mentioned to you our desire, since we have some excess capacity in Louisiana, in trying to have LNG transported from the United States here, and in expediting terminals in Europe, the construction of those terminals to receive that. We were, as a delegation, many of us just came several days ago from Azerbaijan, where we looked at the start of the pipeline that will bring gas into Europe, and talked to the Azeris about that program and how it could be helpful. In addition, as the Vice President mentioned, 50%, Ukraine could produce 50% of its own gas by 2020 if we have effective development of gas reserves here. And so it is a combination of all of these strategies that we believe will be helpful in getting Ukraine on its feet, in driving down energy prices, in making Ukraine less held hostage by Gazprom, by the monopoly. I think these are all issues that we're going to work on.
Look, we're all here because we want to send a message to Mr. Putin and to the world that the United States stands with Ukraine. I think that's very important. I think Putin has to know that. Now, I mentioned before that Vice President Biden announced that there's $50 million, an extra amount, to help with the conducting of the election on May 25th, and there will be other things coming forward. We are all committed to helping Ukraine, and public opinion in the United States supports Ukraine, supports a democratic Ukraine. We are proud that we live in a country where democracy has been on for more than 200 years. And we're very proud when we see a country like Ukraine, when we see patriots who are not afraid to stand up for their country and to stand up for freedom. We read about the American patriots who lived 200 some odd years ago, but the Ukrainian patriots are still living, except for the 105 people, martyrs who died. But we want to help. So we're here to show solidarity, and that means something. I think it means something. I think when the United States talks, people do listen. And I think that we have a responsibility in the United States as well to help Ukraine.
We have a question here in the first row, please.
Інтерфакс Україна, Ігор Соловей.
I will translate.
Певний час назад на цьому ж місці стояв американський експерт.
An American expert was standing here just some time ago.
який в якості однієї з пропозицій рекомендував українській владі звернутися до міжнародних фінансових установ з проханням зменшити списання частини зовнішнього боргу.
And one of his recommendations to the Ukrainian government was to turn towards international financial institutions and ask them to alleviate the debt that Ukraine has before the world.
Чи обговорювались такі питання вже в ході ваших зустрічей, чи піднімалися це питання, і як ви ставитесь до цієї ініціативи?
Was this issue raised amongst your negotiations with the Ukrainian government? Did you discuss this? What's your attitude towards this issue?
We did not negotiate individual things like that with the government. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to show support. That will obviously come. There are a lot of demands being made to Ukraine by the IMF, and I believe that when those demands are put into effect, there will be money from the IMF and other places to enable Ukraine to get on its feet. But everyone knows that the structure that has happened has to be changed. The previous government was corrupt, and that obviously has to change as part of the new Ukraine. So we all believe that the leaders who are running in the election all understand that and are willing to take very important decisions so that Ukraine can get the money from the IMF and the EU and other places as well to put Ukraine back on its feet.
Okay, yeah, one more. Прошу.
Агентство «Укрінформ», Василь Короткий. Ряд українських експертів вважають, що врегулювання ситуації в Україні можливо лише на міжнародному рівні, на рівні перших осіб держав із включенням Путіна особисто.
So some experts say that resolution of Ukraine crisis is possible only with the involvement of the heads of the state in the discussion, in the negotiation, with participation of Mr. Putin.
Як ви вважаєте, наскільки можливим створення такої собі групи високого рівня? Тобто, яке відношення, яке ставлення американської сторони до створення такого собі механізму?
What would be the attitude of the American party, American side towards creation of such an possible mission, high-level mission, including heads of state discussing the future of Ukraine?
Well, you know, there was discussions, there was an agreement, and now Putin has to abide by that agreement. And I think that there will obviously continue to be discussion. Putin has to understand that he cannot get away with what he's doing, and he cannot get away even with keeping Crimea. I'm not satisfied personally. If he said that he wouldn't do anything else in Ukraine but that he would keep Crimea, I wouldn't say that was good. I think he needs to keep nothing. I think he needs to give back all the territories that he's stolen or may anticipate stealing from Ukraine. So there obviously has been and will continue to be top-level discussions and negotiations between heads of state.
And let me add that the problem has not been that heads of state are not communicating. They regularly communicate on the telephone. European heads of state, with the Russian head of state, with the U.S. head of state. And it is not as though we didn't have an agreement in Geneva last Thursday about a way forward. I think it was on Thursday. And so the question is not the heads of state not talking or not even coming to an agreement. The question is how we get President Vladimir Putin to enforce his end of that agreement. And to that issue, the Vice President of the United States spoke today.
I have a follow-up question here.
Добрий вечір. Добрий вечір. Мене звати Павло, лікар. Дуже вам дякую, що ви таку увагу приділяєте до України. Дякую вам і народу Америки. Таке питання. Як Америка може допомогти нам повернути ті реальні гроші, які вивезли наші, кажуть, можновладці за кордон незаконно, а грошей дуже багато. І я думаю, що ми не були б такі бідні, грошей дуже багато. І друге питання на рахунок ядерної зброї, яку підписали, нам якби гарантію дали, але ж її немає, тої гарантії. Тому і до нас так і Путін ставиться, як то. Ну.
I thank you so much for your attention, for coming. Thank to you and to the American people. My question is about the possibilities of your help to help Ukraine bring all of the funds that were stolen from Ukraine by the previous government. They're all over the world. What can you do to help bring them back? Because there was a lot that was stolen. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is about the nuclear weapons. As you know, Ukraine had signed the agreement, which nobody is adhering to. Nobody is guaranteeing on it. Hence, what's your comment about that?
First of all, on the question of what do we do about the pillaging of the people's resources in Ukraine. And the answer to that is to have the international community work together through the banking systems in order to trace those dollars, in order to have transparency of the transactions, the major transactions that came out of Ukraine, so that we monitor where the money went, freeze those accounts, return it to the bank account of the government in Ukraine after the May 25th election. And I think all of us, especially those of us that serve on the Financial Services Committee, as I do, as well as chairing Foreign Affairs, are very interested in tracking down those funds. In terms of the agreement after the breakup of the former Soviet Union, with respect to the situation going forward. This is a very complex issue. We did not have a treaty on this issue go through the Senate, but I would point out that there are several ways forward in trying to ensure that there are consequences for those who broke the agreement. And in particular, effective sanctions is one of the ways to do this. We must remember that the Soviet Union paid a price for its over-reliance on oil and gas. Today, again, 70% of the exports of Russia are oil and gas. And where the monopoly exists for Russia is in Eastern Europe. Clearly, a major strategy by the United States and the rest of Europe and other countries in the region to bring gas into Ukraine and Eastern Europe would dramatically impact the monopoly position that Russia has and the ability to fund its military and fund its government. 52% of that comes from its profits in export on oil and gas. So for those of us on the committee that are looking at this issue, we see another leverage point to make certain that agreements are adhered to.
Question? Sure.
As you can see, we have come here in friendship. Our vice president was here yesterday. And as you know, we've taken some actions and we continue to take actions to help the people of Ukraine. But the question I think that has to be asked first is, what will the Ukrainians do for themselves? Because democracy is hard. We can tell you that. Restoring an economy is hard. The first best thing that Ukrainians can do is to make sure and insist on a fair and free election in May and to elect leaders who will be honest and transparent. And then you will see, I believe, the kind of help that you deserve and need so the world become partners in a democracy.
Question here.
My name is Vasyl Miroshnichenko. I'm a co-founder of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. You already answered my question partially, but I'm very interested to hear the timetable of lifting this ban on the export of oil and gas from the U.S. When do you think it's going to happen? And the next one is on the export markets for Ukraine, because Ukraine is losing Russia as a big export market. And what kind of assistance do you think U.S. government could help us, could actually provide to help us enter other markets in the U.S. or in Africa or other places of the world where United States is heavily present? Thank you.
Let me begin with the second answer first. One of the things that I think the EU will probably do is set up a system for liberalized entry into the EU market with a long phase out on the other end, so that the advantage is front-loaded for Ukraine in terms of its tariff-free or low-tariff exports into Europe. I myself also favor treatment that will allow liberalized trade and export for Ukraine into the U.S. market. And I think that's a very good point. We need to look at the breadbasket here of Europe, and also, for light manufacturing and for many, many products, Ukraine is a major hub. So how do we encourage that? At the same time, we're not discouraging Ukraine from exporting to the east, and it would be our suggestion that over time, perhaps, as tensions reside, you can have an opportunity to trade west, east, north, and south. But now getting back to the other part of this question, which is giving Ukraine an advantage where instead of paying some of the highest costs for energy, you're in the same situation as other countries, and not so dependent upon monopoly pricing from one source. I think there's urgency to this, and I will mention that the Subcommittee on Energy and Power, that's the subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, just before we broke for recess, passed legislation to do that out of the subcommittee. And we expect when we come back that legislation will go to the House, through the committee and to the House floor. I think pressure is building for what our chairman of the Joint Chiefs suggested, which was that we consider this a strategic asset. And if we have excess capability to export, which we do, we're frankly, we've got a glut on the market in the U.S. in terms of gas. We're flaring gas, for example. We're capping wells in the United States. We should take that excess, and we have some excess right now out of Louisiana, and put together a plan to assist. Now, that should not be the only part of that plan for Ukraine. Certainly sending teams over here to help Ukraine develop its own reserves is important. Making certain that that pipeline stays online from Azerbaijan is important. What is done by Polish engineers and others to reverse the flow in the pipes so that gas can be brought from across Europe into Ukraine is also important. We need and that's the message I'm going to carry back to my colleagues. Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
In addition, in terms of energy policy and the need for Ukraine to have additional energy resources that come out from besides Russia, what we are also taking back is the immediate need of the Ukraine to have U.S. businesses and industry work with energy efficiency. That Ukraine needs to use their energy in a more efficient way. We can work together immediately on that issue, which will help forestall any kind of immediate crisis. And so we think not only new resources, but technology in terms of energy efficiency is tremendously needed in the Ukraine.
Very good point.
About 10 years ago, the Congress passed legislation to lift what was called the Jackson-Vanik trade restrictions here on Ukraine because of the progress Ukraine made on human rights. And that created a favored nation status between the United States and Ukraine. But I think we all understand that for the future economy of Ukraine, not only will Ukrainian funds be necessary for the growth of the economy, outside foreign investment is going to be very important as well. But that investment won't occur unless there's a stable government and a stable economy where companies from foreign countries would bring their assets here, know they're going to be protected, know that if there's any disputes they have with any other Ukrainian company or individuals, that there is an independent and fair judiciary that will properly resolve those issues. And then also intellectual property brought here to Ukraine, copyrights, trademarks, software, that intellectual property is going to be protected as well. And without those kinds of protections, that investment won't occur, and without that investment, the economy will have less of an opportunity to grow. So as the Rada and other elected officials after May 25th get in power, that's going to be a very, very important priority for them, creating an economy and an economic climate here in Ukraine that will allow for a lot of investment from other countries.
One more question, if possible.
Hi. You are talking mainly about financial and energetic support, but if the situation requires it, is there going to be military support?
Can you please introduce yourself?
Obviously, the message that is being sent by the West is that if there is military intervention by Russia over the border in the east, the results would be a series of sanctions that would collapse the economy in Russia. Now, we have already seen capital flight out of Russia. We've already seen its stock market impacted. Just the anticipation itself of what might happen has been enough to not just drive investment out of Moscow, but for Russians to move their money offshore because of the nervousness about what might happen. Think for a minute what the consequences would be if the type of debilitating sanctions which the West have the capability of placing on Moscow were put in place. What would that mean to the ruble? What would that mean to the ability of the government even to sustain the expenditures for the country? The message we are sending is that no divisions should come over that border, because if that were to happen, the economic consequences would be absolutely devastating to the economy and the sustainability of the system in Russia.
If I can just add one thing, I think it's very important to recognize, you heard from the Vice President today about a series of additional steps and additional support. I think there is tremendous willingness on behalf of the United States and the international community to continue to monitor this situation and be prepared to impose significant sanctions, to exact a significant cost on Russia should this behavior continue. So I think this is one of those instances in which we need to continue to be actively engaged with the international community and fashion a response which really does punish the behavior at issue here and discourage further aggressive action by Russia. And I think we're here in a bipartisan way to say we are prepared to do that and to lead that conversation in our own country.
Thank you all very much, members of the press, for your participation here today.
Thank you for visiting Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.